Hello, everybody. Welcome to SiouxperCon 2020, SiouxperCon Online. We are with, first off, Garrett and Alex from Wednesday Comics. My name is Marvin. We are here with I'm going to call you a legend, Phil. Legend Phil Hester.
Hey, Phil.
Currently residing in Iowa. Is that correct, Phil?
Yes.
Hey, is everything okay with your house? I know there's that big storm that happened in Iowa.
Yeah, there was the derecho.
Yeah.
And it just clipped my area, but if I lived like even 10 miles north, it would have devastated me. The city I was born in, Cedar Rapids, just got seriously messed up. They lost like 60% of their trees.
That's what I saw, and I thought I couldn't remember if you still lived there or if that's where you grew up, but I saw Cedar Rapids, got hit pretty heavy. And so last night I was like, oh, I wonder how he's doing.
No, it was bad there. And around here, people lost trees and stuff, and some people lost shingles, but it could have been way worse. We lost power for like 24 hours, but there are people in Cedar Rapids that lost power for, 2 weeks.
Yeah. And there's some that like their houses are just like leveled. I saw.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
They said there's still like 50 families in shelters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I saw that and wanted to make sure as Iowa native that you were okay and that everybody is okay. I was looking yesterday at some videos that the University of Iowa had put out about you and your time there, and I find it very interesting. I was watching it, and even from you talking also that your teaching or your education comes from really more like a art, not really comic books, right? That was what you were passionate to do, but you really wanted to figure out like from a fine art kind of standpoint. And I don't even agree with that. I think comics are fine art, but from that kind of distinction. And I was thinking last night, I was like, so your style, especially on Family Tree, which we'll talk a lot about later during the actual Family Tree panel, but your style, like, where does that come from? How did you naturally get there? Because when I saw you in the video, like drawing figures, you're doing a lot of figure, and I was trying to, like, in that video, it's obviously you. I think it was like a year ago or 2 years ago, and so you already have your style. Like, how did you evolve into that kind of Phil Hester style? Because when I see it, and when the guys see it, because we all say all the time, it's like, oh yeah, that's Phil. Like, you know right away that's you.
Right. Well, you have to remember,
does
like,
that like come from
late 80s? Yeah, like in the late 80s when I graduated high school, there wasn't any sort of like comics training around unless you wanted to go to the Kubert School. And that was in New Jersey. So like I knew I wanted to do comics, but I also knew I kind of wanted that full, like you said, that full rounded fine arts training. And I'm glad I got it because it taught me a lot. It's really expanded my horizons about what what art could be. Like when I went into art school, I thought like John Byrne was the best artist who had ever lived, and like by the time I graduated, I had a different idea of like what I considered great art. But as far as how my style developed, I think unless you're consciously aping another artist, which a lot of artists do, if you're just on your own working, your style happens naturally. It's not something you can be totally conscious of. And looking back on it now, like in retrospect, I can see that like my style has like been this like synthesis of these two opposing poles of like the kind of art that I loved when I was a kid. And on one side of it was like the bouncy, cartoony, bright stuff that like Joe Staton was doing or John Byrne. And on this other side was that dark and creepy, kind of itchy stuff that like Bernie Wrightson was doing. So that's why everything I do has these sort of like two irreconcilable aesthetics in it. So even when I'm doing something that's like really serious or scary, there's this kind of like intractable cartooniness to it. And then even when I'm doing something that's bright and bouncy, there's still a lot of dark angles and shadows to it. So it's sort of an unsuccess. In my opinion, it's an unsuccessful synthesis, but that's sort of out of my control because it's sort of this reflection of my own, like, inner process, and that's never going to be a complete process, and it's never going to be successful. But it's like got these two really far apart poles.
It's funny that you mentioned that because on the show we've talked about so you have a lot of sharp angles in your lines, and that's like the most distinct thing from your drawing your art that I can see. But you're right, like it is kind of poppy. It is like, especially in the art I was looking at yesterday, you drew this hoverboard for the University of Iowa, that video.
Right, yeah.
It's very poppy. It's very 90s X-Men kind of colors, but the style is not like 90s X-Men. It's very, like you said, it's kind of taking from that horror maybe from 70s and 80s where it's like very sharp lines, very dark shadows. And it's interesting that you say that because I think you're correct when you say that a lot of artists today kind of are aping a certain kind of style because it's either the cartoony where the round, everything's very round and shiny, or it is the dark and the sharp lines. And so I've never actually thought about that yours is actually a combination of those two. And I think it works very well.
Yeah, you can see some people, like if you look at Bruce Timm, the great animation artist, you can see that like he's lucky that his two big influences were kind of close together. Like Alex Toth and Jack Kirby are like, not on opposite ends of the earth. So to synthesize those two artists produce something that is very logical and satisfying, which is Bruce Timm's style. Whereas when I try to synthesize like my disparate influences, it's not as, some people find it satisfying, but it's still like this kind of, that's why everything's going to have a little bit of dissonance in everything I draw. There's like a note of dissonance in everything. And in some ways that makes things interesting. Like to me, the artist that I like am closest to, that I feel an affinity for, have that sort of like dissonant note in their work that lets you access the work. Like it's sort of the difference between Mignola and Frazetta. Like you can see like there's a ton of Frazetta in Mignola.
Yeah.
But he doesn't approach it from the same classical standpoint that Frazetta did. He abstracts things a little bit more. And that's the dissonant note that lets you into Mignola. So
you think a lot of that comes from like you being a fan of two distinctive art styles, is like you have the perspective of seeing them at their best and you can take from that? Or do you think it's a lot from your life experience, like going to art school and learning a lot from different places? Like,
I think it's largely out of my control. Like,
yeah.
I think it's what I got a kick out of when I was a kid. So that's like, thankfully I saw Frank Miller young. Thankfully I saw Will Eisner young, and like on to them as well. And it wasn't just bad influences that I got into when I was young. They were actually really great storytellers. But yeah, a lot of it's out of your control, because like you could see a lot of different artists, they all have the same level of chops. Like they all can do the same level of drawing, but they're turned on by different things. So they go do different kinds of drawings. You got like you've got a Stuart Immonen and a Terry Dodson. Both can draw like nobody's business, but Stuart's influences pull him in a certain direction and Terry's pull him in another way. And that results into vastly different styles, even though they have kind of equal abilities.
Would you say, though, that it's probably a good thing, not only for you, but for artists to be unconscious of their style and not trying to like push it a certain way? Like,
the people that are overly conscious of their style can get trapped in aping somebody else's for a long time, or they also get hung up about not having a style and they get sort of in their own head about it. And it's funny that a lot of artists don't realize what their style is until they hear it from an outside perspective. Like they think they're doing one thing, and what's interesting about their work might be something else entirely. And you need another perspective to sort of identify that.
And so, like, when you start your process, and I think you talked a little bit about this in that University of Iowa video that I watched, but when you start your process, it's like, I want to draw this scene. And so you start with just like the idea of the scene in your head. You don't really like kind of like, it's not your style in your head. You're just like, I'm drawing this, right? Or how does that process start for you?
That's not a process that follows any sort of logical progression. It's just like when I'm working from a script or I'm writing a script that I'm going to draw, I just start drawing unconsciously right away, just getting impressions from the scene that I'm going to need to draw. And when you're doing things like at that thumbnail level, your style is not really there anyway, except at its most base component. Like you're thinking about compositions and you're thinking about storytelling, but your actual rendering style is not involved yet, which is probably why I like thumbnailing the most, because it's just about storytelling. But when I start like that, it's just pure imagination. And then as it reaches the page, that's when I start making concessions to reality, concessions to like, balloon placement, things like that I have to start adapting this initial like swirl of creativity towards reality. And that's when you have to make all these compromises that kind of bring it to the page.
So currently you're writing Family Tree. I believe, are you still writing? I believe not writing, you're drawing it. I believe I saw, are you still writing, you're writing a book for Dynamite, was it? Or
no, I just got done writing a book for Aftershock.
Yes, okay.
Yeah, called Stronghold with Ryan Kelly on the art. And I write shorts for the Titans Walmart book, and for the Swamp Thing Walmart book. And then so I'm always kind of like writing or drawing short stories for DC for their Giants.
Yeah.
And I'm always working on like little things that haven't been announced yet. And, like I'm working on I don't know if it's been announced. I'm not supposed to say it or not, but I'm working on a one shot for DC's Endless Winter event that's coming up.
Oh, cool.
Okay.
Well. I'm drawing that. Yeah.
They always do those seasonal kind of books. Is that what you mean?
That'd be their big event.
Oh no, the Wonder Woman, yes.
Well,
which, by the way,
like all the DC characters.
No, but no, the ad I saw was Wonder Woman. But,
yeah. Endless Winter, and they do two different kinds of events at DC, which are like big, epic, like continuity changers, and then like breathers. And this is sort of a breather. It's like an event that lets regular teams on books sort of get reshuffled and like ramp up to the new year, and it's sort of the way like I'm gonna date myself, like Atlantis Attacks kind of ran through a bunch of books but didn't necessarily rewrite the history of those books. It's sort of Endless Winter, sort of like that.
Correct me if I'm incorrect, but I believe you wrote Wonder Woman. You did some work with JMS, and then when he left, I believe you did some Wonder Woman work, right?
Yeah. I took over after he left.
Yes. So I'm curious because Wonder Woman is a character, obviously, since the movies came out, has been kind of jousted forward as like this mainstream kind of appeal, like that she hasn't had probably since the 70s when the TV show was on. And so I was curious. It seems though that like in terms of comics, the Wonder Woman book has had difficulty like kind of getting that kind of mainstream appeal. What do you think, like what kind of story for Wonder Woman do you think is still out there to be told? That let's say I say, Phil, hey, Phil, I'm going to put you on the book. Like what's your Wonder Woman story in today's age?
Yeah, that's tough because there's a tendency to want to overcorrect and make these stories about things that are happening right now instead of a character. And what's great about all the superhero characters that you know and love is they have like an inner conflict. Peter Parker's motivated by guilt. Batman's, motivated by preventing another Batman from coming to life. Superman's a stranger in this, new world. They have all these like internal conflicts. And I think people have a hard time figuring out what Wonder Woman's is. Is it like she's a female icon in a man's world, or is she from this sort of different idyllic world and like into our polluted one? And you've got to find that. And to me, the way I approached it when I wrote it was that she was always going to be constant, like her nobility was a constant aspect of her character, and that it came through even when she, like, I don't expect anybody to remember the arc I wrote, but like it came through when she was like a toddler. She was like, she went out into man's world and like found a slave trader and kicked his ass, you know, when she was a baby, and that got her in trouble. So like that sort of like sense of justice and nobility that's in her, it can be a constant thing. And like her turmoil doesn't necessarily have to be in her. It can be with the fact that she knows what's right and she knows what's good, and she's in this world that does not. I mean, like this world that's completely divorced from, and sort of the worse the world gets, the more that contrast is sort of highlighted. And so I don't think you need to like revamp Wonder Woman as much as put her in more interesting situations.
Yeah,
you know,
I agree.
Speaking of that, like, you know, Justice League Dark, Wonder Woman currently has, like, she's kind of been more involved with like magic kind of powers. Like, I could totally see you drawing a little more darker side of Wonder Woman, like in that kind of magic verse that she's kind of entering in.
It would be fun. I pitched a Wonder Woman kind of alternate reality, and it was a much darker thing. I mean, it wasn't like as far out as Daniel's Dead Earth, but it was, you know, it was sort of like kind of a, not necessarily a reboot of her origin, but sort of a different angle on her origin that kind of showed Paradise Island or Themyscira for something more than like it's just its surface. So yeah, I had a lot of plans for Wonder Woman, and we didn't get to do them.
It's interesting that you bring that up, Garrett, about Justice League Dark, because that is a franchise in which they've tried to kind of get it more mainstream appeal and like put it out there. And Wonder Woman is the newest addition to it, to try to like put something new in to get it going. But I feel like a lot of those characters, Swamp Thing being one of them, Constantine, and like that book just got canceled. Like a lot of those characters on their own are interesting. What is it, Phil, do you think about, like, why can't they make that work? Like like I feel like it should. There's a lot of things you could do from it.
Right. I know how you make it work. You make Batman the lead. That's how you make it work.
He was involved for a second, wasn't he, Garrett? And then all of a sudden he
like
just
the
like,
first arc. He's like, this is too much for me. You guys take this on.
Which, to be fair, I mean,
but seriously, not only like a sales perspective, but from a story perspective, making Batman deal with this illogical stuff is interesting.
Yeah.
Like, making him deal with this stuff that he doesn't want to deal with, that's interesting. And that could have driven the book for a long time. And also, Batman sells comics. Constantine doesn't necessarily.
No.
Even though I think he's very cool. All the characters I think are cool do not sell comics because you've got to appeal to, I mean, comics is sort of a niche audience, but you've got to appeal to the broadest segment of that already kind of narrow cast.
I mean, yeah, all those characters have a small audience, but together they don't have enough to like carry a book that Batman would.
Well, because I think a lot of people see them, like, I'm a big Swamp Thing fan, right?
Yeah.
But I don't think, in my head, the Swamp Thing that appears in Justice League Dark is not Swamp Thing because he's not alone in a swamp. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, actually, you know, so the first arc of Justice League Dark did have Batman, and all three of us enjoyed that first arc. And then when he left, I think that's when we all kind of dropped off. Not because we weren't reading it for Batman, but you're right. Like it was nice to have that dynamic of somebody being totally skeptical of all this stuff, and then these guys really being in that world. Especially when you had somebody like Detective Chimp was part of that group, and you had Batman, both detectives, but they both had different viewpoints on how to solve these things, which I thought was interesting.
And nowadays, like, I mean, what did it run for? Like 26 issues, 27 issues, something like
that? Yeah.
That's like nowadays, that's a success. That's a success.
Which I was going to ask you also, because so Family Tree you're writing, I keep saying that. Sure. Oh, you know, you're all creating it. Yes. Family Tree you're on. and it's obviously create your own thing, and you don't have to adhere to those kind of standards of having a popular character, not have popular. It's your own story, but
Right.
in that kind of world, Marvel and DC and the superhero world, it does seem like you're stating, a lot of things don't last anymore. Like there are some books that last and go, like they're never going to go away. Batman Detective, obviously, but then any other book that gets announced, like the three of us are always like, should we jump on this? Like, how long is this going to last? Like, I don't know. Do you think the market's changing? Like, it's not monthly like that anymore for some of these people, or for some of these characters, I guess.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it is changing. No one's ever really going to have a handle on it, and no one ever actually has ever had a handle on it. If we knew what made hits, everything would be a hit, right? So it's largely a matter of like trying different things and seeing what catches on, and a lot of that has to do with a publisher or a creator sticking with something through hard times. I think Kirkman is famous for saying that like Walking Dead #3 sold like 6,000 copies or something. But a lot of people pull a plug on a book at that point. You know, a lot of like companies and creators pull plugs when they see those numbers. But he kept at it, you know, and he committed. And companies can do that too. Like if a publisher wanted to, they could write it out and say, look, this is the book you're getting. You know, like we're not going to pull the plug and start over with another Iron Man. Or, you know, you could be like Marvel and just keep, you know, there's a new #1 every year.
I mean, obviously people jump onto #1s, and that's the reason why they do that. But you're right. I mean, there's some characters in which they do stick by, Superman being one of them. Like Superman took a dip for a while just because the character, like nobody could figure out how to write him for today's audience. And then they got Bendis on board, and Bendis is a name. And so obviously you're going to see sales go up. But I'm curious to see because you said that like trying different things and seeing what sticks, one of them being those giants in the Walmart stores that you're writing 2 of them for. Do you write that in the same kind of mindset as you would if it was a monthly comic, or do you write them differently?
No, we write those for as if somebody were picking up that character for the first time, you know. So when you're writing Titans with a bunch of characters that have very convoluted histories and continuities, and even Swamp Thing has a convoluted continuity. I mean, he's been around for 40 years. You have to like the editorial objective we were given was streamline everything and boil these characters down to their essences. So people picking these up for the first time would get what Swamp Thing is about from this one short story, even if it's just 8 pages. They have to get what Swamp Thing's about just from that. And that was the challenge, but it was also very rewarding to do that, especially for Titans. I'm bummed that one didn't last. Like the whole, that whole experiment's over, by the way. Like,
yeah. Well, there's still like, I think they're getting a re-release in comic stores now every once in a while. So yeah.
And they're like all the inventory that we created for those books is available digitally now too. And the decisions regarding that are not necessarily based on how successful those books were. There's a lot of, appeasing retailers in there, and anyway. So yeah. So to me, the joy of writing those books was finding what was essential about those characters, especially the Titans characters, and kind of boiling all that down and streamlining it, not getting hung up on their continuities.
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of that. Like when they first were putting those out, as you stated, like they're to get people into comics. And so necessarily like I didn't go out and seek them because I was just like, I think I know there were reprints for people who hadn't read those things in the back, and then obviously new creations at the beginning. And like you stated, now they're coming out in places that comic book readers are more likely to look at, or at least people that have been around for a while.
Right.
Do you think I feel like, I don't know obviously the actual behind the scenes, but I feel like Family Tree is doing well. It's a book that's out there. I see a lot of buzz for Family Tree. Is it it must be really difficult in this day and age for an original idea like that to be like, to get that kind of buzz and get the kind of popularity, since you have established characters like the Titans, like not doing well, and you have, I mean, even so much as like Constantine had a TV show, Constantine in movies,
Right.
and his book cannot sell. So like, is it harder for original stuff to get out there these days?
Yes and no. It's harder for it to reach the broader comic book collecting world, but there's sort of a subset of the comic collecting world that really supports creator-owned stuff. You know, I'm sure you have friends that just go to the store and buy Image comics, or Vault comics, or things like, you know, they're just about indie books. And then you have other friends who just buy superhero books and nothing else. And so you can sort of, it's almost like music, you know, you can make a living doing indie music, you know, and it's going to be, you're never going to sell out arenas, but you can be the Mountain Goats and work for, you know, 20 years with your limited audience. And that's sort of the way Family Tree works. Like in that world of people who buy indie books, we're doing really well. And it doesn't hurt to have Jeff's name attached to things. Jeff sells books, both mainstream and indie. So he's sort of any project he does is going to get attention. But yeah, I think that's sort of the story of the 20th and 21st century as we move towards narrow casting all our entertainment. Now, instead of like when I was a kid, there were 3 channels, and you watched what was on those 3 channels, right? So like if a movie came to television, like when Jaws came to television, it was a big deal. Like everybody on earth watched Jaws that night. Like 100 million people watched Jaws that night. Now if I want to watch Jaws, I can just go stream it.
Yeah.
You know, or if I feel like I like horror movies, but I only like supernatural horror movies, I can just stream those. And we live in such a rich like environment of entertainment availability that people can like pick and choose exactly what they want to see. And like I said before, there are people that buy comic books and never buy Iron Man. When I was a kid, like if you were into comics, you bought everything, you know, because that was the only comics you were going to get. Like I don't even particularly care about Conan, right? But I bought Conan novels because that was the fantasy material that was available at the time. Nowadays, you can buy whatever you want, which is both a great like benefit to fandom, but also kind of a problem for the creators because it's very hard to create something that breaks wide and like encompasses everybody. So like a Walking Dead is like a unicorn, you know, like something that breaks that wide. Like I said, we don't know why things are hits. If we knew everything.
It is very much segmented, like you were saying nowadays. Like you can go out and not only look at the shelves, but even go on to like a digital marketplace and see books that I've never even heard of before. As 3 people who do a podcast and talk about what books are coming out this week, like I'll see books and be like, I've never heard of that book before. Or on the flip side of things, there's a lot of creator-owned in terms of like anybody can submit stuff to Comixology for them to put it out or anybody else. And so I think that's great. Like you could just go out there and really, you just need to have the passion and the wherewithal to put together something to have it out like that. But like you said, yeah, it does segment the market to figure out like, if I want, for instance, we on the show for one of our book clubs read a book about fencing. I don't know if you read this book. And it's like, I know
what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's like that's something that is like, not only is that a super niche sport, but now we have a comic book about that sport, and then even that comic is like kind of Japanese manga inspired kind of art, and so like it's a niche of a niche, and we actually thought it was great. It's actually fantastic, but you're right though. Like if that was what I liked, I can go get it.
Yeah.
And so does that give you more freedom though to be like, I'm just going to put it out there. Like somebody's going to like they'll like it or they won't like it, but like there's obviously I can find an audience now. Yeah, but like you said, it's not a big audience.
It's harder to make hits now. It's harder to create a hit, but it's easier to get your stuff out. So like, if you're willing to get through those hard times, if you're willing to get through that Walking Dead #3 sales, like you can stick it out and like get your stuff out there and maybe develop an audience. Like the world of web strips, like is largely ignored by the mainstream comic buying audience, but there are web strips out there that have followers in the hundreds of thousands.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When they put out a collection or a trade, it's the best-selling graphic novel that month, and it's totally separate from the Wednesday crowd hemisphere. Mm-hmm. Like I said, it is easier to get your stuff out. Every time I have to say this, every time I've wanted to do a book and put together a pitch for that book and submitted that to a publisher, it's happened. Like I don't have any books that have never happened outside of like creators, falling out to the wayside or some problem with the publisher going under. Like if I wanted to do a book, I've been able to do the book, which is great because like if you were a cartoonist in the 70s, that wasn't necessarily true. Like it was hard to like before Cerebus came rolling along, it was hard to like just get your book out there unless you were willing to do it for a major publisher or an underground publisher. So I would say like the environment right now for people that just want to get their stuff out there is great. The environment for people who want to get their stuff out there and have it become the next Power Rangers is tough.
Well, definitely the ramp up and the grind that you have to like make it a hit. And even like you said, sometimes don't even know, like stuff catches fire that might not even be like something that you thought would be, but the grind is definitely the hill's steeper, but there's a lot more options to go up that hill now.
Yeah, true.
Like somebody that, and I believe you know him too, but somebody that's been on our show and locally put out his own stuff is Dylan Jacobson with the Champions. And that for me is like the definition of you want to make something, get out there and grind it. Like he went to local shops, not even just comic shops, like a coffee shop, and was like, hey, you want to carry my book? And I know he's recently started putting it on digital, but for him it was like, how do I want to do this, let me go out there and try to get this done. And that was actually to like, I think today's world is way easier to put your stuff out. When he did it, he like was going locally and like, hey, I'll figure out how to print this if you sell it. And so I think it really is it's a nice world to be a reader in. It's a harder world to definitely be a creator in because, like you said, so segmented. But from a reader standpoint, I don't think there's ever a point where I'm like, hey, none of this stuff is for me. Like if I want something, it's out there.
I think, like you said, it is a great time to be a reader. It's a little bit tougher time to be a creator in terms of like, if you want to get rich, if you want to get your stuff out there, it's a beautiful time. And again, it's just like music. Music's the same way right now.
Yeah.
Anybody can put their music out there. No, the record company's not buying anybody a jet anymore.
No.
Like in the 70s, this is a fact that blows my mind. In the 70s, Dr. Hook, which was like a middling band at best, had their own jet. Like, and not a little jet, a big jet.
Yeah.
But it's not that way anymore, like I said, more stuff, but less of it breaking wide.
No, you're definitely right about the music kind of comparison, because like things like Spotify, you can just put it on there and sell, in iTunes, you can just sell your own music if you really want to be that person, just to put your stuff out there. I kind of want to circle back, and we talked a little bit about trying new stuff, and you were writing Swamp Thing for those Walmart 100 pages. And that is a character definitely that you have a lot of history with, but also it's a lot of history of that character, not really, like it gets close to bringing it into the mainstream, but yet somehow always gets pushed back. Like it got a TV show that everybody said was good. It looks fantastic, and yet it was canceled because it cost too much. Right. And so like, I wonder, what do you think? What is it about this character that I think they can get it right creatively, but like, it just something always happens where it doesn't work out for Swamp Thing.
Because what is great about it is what is limiting about it. It's weird. Swamp Thing's weird. Like it's a plant zombie corpse guy, and that's weird, but when you see it, there's something cool about it, so you're into it, but you're into it because of weirdness. But its weirdness is why it's never going to be like totally mainstream.
Yeah.
And that's just the way it is. Like if you put small, I'll tell you my experience with Firebreather as a good example of how this works. I think what made Firebreather, for the people that don't know, Firebreather is about a kid who is half kaiju, half human. And it's about his teen years, about him in high school, and his mom wanting him to, go to college, become an orthodontist, and his dad wanting him to grow up and become king of the monsters. Okay. And the mom and the dad are divorced. So they're like, there's this custody battle over this kid who's, could be a superhero, could be a supervillain, we don't know. So like what's good about that is what's weird about it. The idea that a human and a kaiju have an offspring and that they're divorced. Okay. That's what's cool about it. Well, a lot of different like film and TV companies came after Firebreather. It wound up at Cartoon Network, but for a long time it was at Paramount. Other movie studios looked at it, and then it went into development at Cartoon Network. And the very first thing that producers wanted to do to Firebreather was get rid of the weirdness. To us, the most important thing about that book was that it was an allegory for puberty, because there's this kid who's kind of a dragon kid, and his body is strange and terrifying to him. And that's what puberty is. Your body starts to become the stranger to you, and it's at once exhilarating and terrifying. And that's why it was such a beautiful allegory. The very first thing Cartoon Network said to us was, does he have to be a dragon?
Wow.
Can he just be a normal kid? And we're like, that's like, I go, he has to at least be orange. He has to like be physically different for this to make any sense. And so it went through a bunch of different versions at Cartoon Network, where he was a normal kid, where it was a 2D cartoon, was just all these different takes, until they finally arrived at, what did make it to screen, which was sufficiently weird, and we were happy with the product that got there. But it's the instinct of the mainstream to always like neuter whatever is cool about the mainstream.
Yeah.
Not the mainstream, but the product. So like, that's why you'll see like a director or somebody do a really kick-ass first movie, and then Hollywood will get their hooks into them, and their stuff just gets more and more diluted as they go. And it's not necessarily the director's fault. It's Hollywood went and got this director because she was weird and had a unique voice. And then it's almost like an absurdist kind of story where they just try to beat the weirdness out of that creator that they love so much. And
which is funny, because like you said, that's what sold it to its initial readers. And I think their perspective is that the mainstream doesn't like that. Like, they need to make it so that it appeals to everybody from the 4 different kind of quadrants, old, young, male and female. But also, like, they have to understand at some point, you can't please everybody. If you're doing that, you have to, like you said, there's those unicorns like Walking Dead that appeal to all of them, but that's so hard to hit that that shouldn't be your goal.
It's like if you looked at Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles from the outside,
yeah,
you would never think that every kid on Earth would know what that is, because it's a parody of Daredevil, starring these weirdly drawn turtles that don't necessarily even look like turtles. They look weird, right? But it caught on. But if it had been focus grouped to death, turtles would have never turned into anything. It would have been like. I mean,
even the title alone. Yeah, even the title alone is it fills your mouth, and you're like, this isn't. You can't throw this on a billboard. Look how big that is. That's why they always say TMNT, because it's like it's so big. Right. But like you said, like
his background is full of TMNT stuff.
Loves it. He loves it. But I think Alex will agree. When they go and try to make it the Michael Bay produced movies, they do take a lot of the weird out, and they try to make it like, hey, they look real now. And it's like, yeah, but dude, I wasn't watching TMNT because I said, hey, those turtles look realistic. Like, that wasn't the appeal to them.
The teeth look realistic. Yeah.
Or even like when they like, let's say something that, I mean, it kind of lives in the comic world, but it's more video games. Like when they made that Sonic movie, and originally they were like, let's make him look real, and they're like,
Right.
no, like I like how he looks, like how he looks. Like, why are you trying to make it look like an actual animal? I don't understand that. And which is funny to me, Phil, because Swamp Thing is definitely a character if they did it how it's supposed to be. If they're thinking financially, this thing you can make a toy out of a Swamp Thing, like a different, all these different types of toys. Like this thing, this guy would be huge if you could actually put it out there how it's supposed to be put it out there. But you're right,
They did make
what's
toys
that?
of it in the 90s.
I know. That's when I fell in love. That cartoon series, like it didn't last long, but that's when I first got into the character. And that, but you're right though. Like the thing that I liked about Swamp Thing was how weird it was. It wasn't that I was like, hey, how does the swampiness of him stick together? Give me the science. I was like, no, like I like this guy. He's cool. His arms can stretch out. He lives in this world. And then as I got older, the human side of that story appealed to me, and the idea of like, is he actually like, is he more human or is he more the swamp, and like looking introspectively into that character. But it's things like that, and actually, and we'll speak more about Family Tree during the Family Tree panel, but there's a little bit about that too. Like I feel like the characters in that, or one character in that book, but you have that they're maybe not entirely human, like they have this kind of tree aspect to them, right? And so you have a lot of those same kind of questions, and that's what, like, the world revolves around those kind of stories. Like, who am I? Like, why am I here? And it's a universal story, and that's where the appeal comes from. It's not taking the weird out. It's to appeal towards that human story in Swamp Thing. And yet they tend to like, hey, let's just make him like more human. And it's like, no, that the question is he? Like, it's not let's make him human. I need that question.
Yeah. It's yeah, it's a constant push and pull, and if you create something like that, like Jeff and I and Eric and Ryan did with Family Tree, when larger media come looking at it, and they have come looking at Family Tree, it helps to have creators who are committed to what's important about the series.
Yeah.
And not just say yes to the first person that comes along. We've turned down offers that were pretty good because they didn't get what Family Tree was about.
Did they ask you if they could not be trees? Is that what they said?
No.
Can you cut out the tree part? Like, I don't like that.
I won't go that far, but there are people that didn't get what it was about, and there were some people that did, and they maybe necessarily didn't have more money, you know, but we liked their take on what was going to happen. And I'm not going to announce anything here because there's all these parts, but I think we found the right people. So
that's awesome.
Well, like you said, like, do you think a lot of that comes from they think they know better what appeals to people and creatively? Okay, it's not a financial decision, right?
Like, or is it? I think anybody wants to justify their job, right? So they feel like, this is what I know. I know audiences, so I'll take what you've done and we'll kind of polish it up and get it out to the broader audience. So there's always going to be this war between like the creators who are like, no, we know what's special about this, and the people who want to bring it to a wider audience and saying, we know audiences, trust us. This, you know, we know this one thing. And the truth is, maybe they don't. Like, maybe nobody knows wider audiences.
Well, like you said, a lot of times it's just getting it out there. You can't predict the unicorns.
The stuff that you see, like Poochie, you know, from The Simpsons. Okay, the stuff that you see made in a focus group, you can tell right away that it was made in a focus group. And it's like there are like 50 sitcoms a year that make it to screen that are focus group sitcoms, and they come and go. You know, they're gone. They're totally interchangeable.
You can tell for the commercial. You'd be like, I know what that story is. Like, I know what that show is.
Yeah. And so, you know, it's like all those Chicago shows, Chicago Med, Chicago Fire, Chicago Deli, whatever. Like all these Chicago, they're like, there are people on that do fantastic work, but the one Chicago show came out, and then the producers are like, we need a bunch of different shows exactly like this.
What if we had this show, but it was firemen? And they're like,
Yeah,
all right, there we go. I would watch the Deli show, though.
Yeah,
Would
I
watch
would
the Deli show?
The Deli one sounds the most interesting.
Yeah, it would be good. A Chicago Deli show would be good. So like, and that's nothing to disparage like the creators on that show or like the actors on that show. They're all like can do great work, but like instead of looking at what made the first one work and saying all this great work from these actors and these writers, let's take these actors and writers and ask them what they really want to do, and like what fantastic thing would we create. Instead, they say, no, let's CSI this and do this again and again and again and again.
And I think a lot of times, and I might be totally wrong with this, Phil, but I think you have some perspective on this. You join a show like that is a hit because you want to, hey, let me join this and see what I can put my spin on it. Let me see what I can do to make this like different. Like I love, for instance, like let's say Batman for exists. Like people join Batman. Obviously, it's successful. They don't join it. DC puts people on it, but like you say yes because you're like, oh, I want to do my take on Batman, and it's not like you said, people do good work on stuff that is a hit like that. And it's not because they're totally devoid of having any kind of creative in their life. It's because they want to do the creative on those things. But there isn't there's very little wiggle room on those things to really do stuff, especially like, let's say Batman. Like that's a character who every single time they try to do something different, within 3 months, it's back to normal. Because it's like, oh, what are we doing here? You can't do that. Even so much as with Tom King's last run where he was going to get married and they're like, you know what, let's switch writers and you can go do that as a side thing, whatever. And I mean, I know you said you did some DC work. Is it still appeal to you to do that kind of work, to create like the DC and Marvel work, or are you really focusing on your own stuff? Yeah?
No, certainly it does. I mean, because like you said, you feel like you grew up on these characters and you feel like you've got a take on them that is worthwhile, that people might want to see. And I will give DC credit for, I mean, Batman is such a like indelible character. Like he's so identifiable. He's so like, you can, I don't know if you guys remember like, or even now, but like 20 years ago, they were doing all these Batman figures that were just like Batman's a pirate. Batman's Arctic Explorer, and you still recognize that it was Batman right off the bat because he's such like this indelible character. So I think that lets them have a little more leeway in terms of like the way they allow him to be represented. Because like if you look back to the past and you look at like Kelly Jones Batman, that's wild. Like that is really wild. And
my favorite, those long ears.
But they've been willing to let people kind of like put their spin on Batman for a long time. And I think it's reaped benefits for DC. Like, cause like you can have people, how we talked about there were like superhero fans and indie fans. Batman has all those people. Like they're indie fans that'll buy Batman because the creators are involved with it and the spin they're putting on it. And because you can do like an adults only Batman book at the same time you're doing a Batman Adventures book, and they can both be true to the spirit of Batman. That's what makes him like sort of like this gold standard of big franchise characters. You can't change Superman too much and still have it be Superman, but Batman you can mess around with, and that's what makes him worth his weight in gold.
You know what? You're actually, that's 100% right, because, and I will give them credit because they're like their Black Label stuff with White Knight, and that's still Batman, but it's like, it's Sean Murphy's take on it. And then you have like, there was Batman Noel, and there is like this, they do even so much as like Scott and Greg doing Last Night on Earth, and which was totally weird with Batman, but you still like, you're right. Like that character, even when Grant was like, hey, let's have Batman go through time, which is like super weird. It still works because that character is so well defined. Yeah.
And I think if you trust your creators and your audience, you can do that with other characters too. If you have a big enough personality handling the character, like you have with Daniel Warren Johnson and Wonder Woman, you can take a wildly different take on Wonder Woman and still have it be successful, both aesthetically and sales-wise. And it's just a matter of finding the right person for the right character. And I think to sort of bring this back to what we were talking about initially, maybe you don't have a Constantine book out every month. Maybe just have a Constantine book out when you've got a creator that has something important to say about that character. I feel like the last creative team did. Like the last creative team was great, I thought. But they're weighed down by decades and decades of Hellblazer continuity stuck to it. So like,
I mean, they even tried to attach the Sandman name to it to like give it that boost, and they still were like, well, I mean, DC went through obviously something unfortunate with all the kind of layoffs that they had. So
I'm of mind that book could still be being published, but that's a different story. But so we might be moving to a model. I remember Frank Miller talking about this like 30 years ago when he gave the keynote at, I think it was the Eisners or some award show. He gave a keynote speech, and he was like, hopefully we're moving to a world where Batman doesn't have to come out every month, but Batman comes out when there's a Frank Miller to tell a story about it, I mean, Batman's coming out every month because it's Batman. But like,
what if he didn't have to? You're saying like a quarterly book? They're like, hey, work on it.
There's only Dr. Fate books when somebody has something cool to say about Dr. Fate. And in a way, DC was in that mode, like in the 80s. Like if they had a character they liked, they'd give him a miniseries, and the miniseries would come out. But the retail model changed such that retailers didn't support miniseries, so it became hard to do that. And nowadays, Marvel and DC, they put out books that they know are going to be miniseries or at least just maxi series, but they can't say that because retailers will not support those books. So when they put out a Speedball book, okay, they know Speedball's not going to go 300 issues. They know Speedball's going to last maybe 16 issues, but they can't say that because they need to at least give it a fighting chance.
Yeah, I've noticed that. Like the creator will say, "Hey, we're getting the ending we wanted, like we knew," and like they'll know, like it's been they had 12 issues. And
honestly, you know by issue 3, like how your book's gonna last.
Yeah. Well, we're wrapping up on time here, Phil, and we will be talking more about Family Tree. I got a lot to say about Family Tree when Ryan joins us later. Is there anything that you want the audience to know that you have on the docket coming out here or check out? Obviously, go back and get that Swamp Thing and the Titans. It's available now in more areas.
They're in comic shops now, and they're still on shelves at Walmart. So, like, you can still pick them up. And
if you can find them, our local Walmart could never find them. So I don't know.
Yes, it's weird. Some like it seemed like little Walmarts had them and big ones didn't. Anyway, I've got those books. I've got an upcoming an upcoming special for Endless Winter at DC, and of course Family Tree.
There you go, Phil, Hester. We've been Wednesday Comics, Alex Pastrello, Garrett, and Marvin. SiouxperCon 2020 online. Continue watching the panels. Have a fantastic day.